Hello, welcome back to the channel. Now today's video, something a bit different I suppose. It's going to be how not to buy a car. This Fiesta that I've just bought is going to be the demonstrator vehicle, should we say. Now, usually I like to think I'm quite thorough with my sort of checking up on vehicles before I buy them. This one, I don't know what happened. I think I just got caught up in the excitement. So we'll start at the beginning, I suppose. I saw this vehicle, this Fiesta, on Facebook for sale. It was pretty local to me. Well, yeah, very local to me. It was up for 300 quid. Now, usually what happens, if I see something I like on Facebook, once I've messaged them, either they'll message back saying it's sold, or it isn't, but I've got 2-3 people coming to look over the next couple of days, and then it gets sold. This one, however, messaged them on it must have been the Friday. They messaged me back the Saturday morning, still available. I went to see it later the same morning. Yeah, bought it, and then brought it home. Before any of that though, usually I do a check on Auto Trader just to see what similar vehicles are going for. Now this is a 55 plate 1.4 TDCi Fiesta with 88,000 miles on the clock. And yeah, similar vehicles are going for 12 or 1300 quid, which is 1,000 quid more than what it was up for on Facebook. So I thought, could be a good profit margin, that. Better go and see it. The second thing I usually do, which I didn't do this time, is go on my sort of vehicle smart app, is the one I use on my phone. It's just a free vehicle MOT sort of history checker. But obviously, with MOTs being online for the last 10 years or so, you can see if there's any mileage discrepancies. I didn't do that with this Fiesta, and there's what looks to be quite a big mileage discrepancy. About 10 years ago, I think it jumped from 42-ish thousand miles to 250 something thousand miles. Now, me personally, I just think that the MOT tester has accidentally pressed rain starting. Accidentally pressed, an extra number. But is a potential buyer going to see it that way? So there's mistake number one. Mileage check. Make sure you do it thoroughly. If you have to, if the car is, quite a bit dearer than this one is, pay for like a full HPI check. Obviously, to make sure there's no outstanding finance, the car's not been scrapped or written off. So that'd be my first tip. Now we move on to actually seeing the vehicle. Now when I got there, there was a battery charger hooked up to it, and the guy gave me some story about how he'd left the lights on overnight, so he was just charging it up, which, fair enough, it can happen. It did fire up once he'd taken the charger off. Sounded sweet. It was advertised as having a diesel leak, which it did have, so can't complain about that. My main concern was what the bodywork was like, and on this one it wasn't too bad. I think there's a bit of a crease on the sort of front edge of the bonnet. The fuel filler flap is missing, and then the side, the B-pillar trims, one's missing and one's been screwed in with some Phillips screws, so it looks a bit unsightly. But they're common issues on these Fiestas, and I don't think they're too expensive to replace. Didn't look at anything mechanically really, didn't check tyres, didn't check brakes, which I should have really, but I knew I was going to be fixing this myself. If you haven't got that ability, or if you haven't got the space or the time, and you're going to have to pay somebody to check it over or change anything that you may have missed checking it over, then it might not be worth the £300 that this was worth to me. Next was, well, after that, I just obviously asked. It was on his driveway, and I didn't have any way to get it home that night. I had to go and get the trade plates and whatnot, so I asked if it was alright to collect it later that evening. He said it was fine, so I came back to it about 7 o'clock. Tried to start it, the battery was flat again, and I thought, here we go, another problem. I should have clicked, really, the state of the battery terminals on that battery, that something wasn't right. I didn't. Well, you know, just took his word that the battery was decent. So yeah, got it started, boost pack, drove it home. Another problem came up. So top tip, always test drive a car, no matter how cheap it might be. You know, if it's lacking power, if there's any knocks, bangs, smoke out of the back end, you know, you might not be able to see with it just idling on somebody's driveway. When I drove this home, the clutch was slipping like mad. Now, I don't know if it's the diesel that's leaking. It is leaking down the passenger side. I don't know if it's getting between the gearbox and the engine and it's got onto the clutch disc, or whether the clutch is just worn. But either way, there's some extra work for me to do. So always test drive the vehicle. I should know this by now. This is probably the getting onto the 60th car that I've bought and owned. So I suppose to summarise, so you don't make the mistakes that I've made. Number one, do a background check on the vehicle. You know, if it's a cheap one, just an MOT mileage check. You know, because something that's 14 years old and less than 500 quid, it's not likely there's going to be any finance on it. If it's, you know, more expensive, do a full sort of HPI check. I think other companies are available. Tip 2, always check over what you can. You know, if you can see underneath for corrosion, depending on what the vehicle is, check for oil leaks, coolant leaks, check brakes, tyres. You know, always check whatever mechanical components you can. And then step 3, or tip number 3, test drive it. If it doesn't feel right, chances are that you're going to notice that it doesn't feel right, and then you can either negotiate on price or just walk away, basically. Don't do what I've done. Luckily, like I say, for me, it was fairly cheap. I'll be fixing it myself. It's just sort of an extra 4 or 5 hours doing that clutch that I didn't account for. But yeah, so that is the end of this video on how not to buy a car. Cheers for watching, and I hope it's useful for someone. Thanks, bye.
Like, share, subscribe, the Car Lovers channel.